Every Wednesday, we speak with Sheriff Joe Lombardo from Metro Police for our Morning Cup of Joe segment. This morning, though, is a little different. We're going to speak with him one-on-one here for 20 minutes or so.
And there's really a lot to talk about today. There's been a lot going on, a tough few days with protests all across the country, including here locally, after the death of George Floyd. It's all happening really under the umbrella of the coronavirus. Now, in most cases, the protests nationwide and here in Las Vegas have been peaceful, but there has been some cases of violence, including here in Las Vegas, very much so on Monday night. Sheriff Joe Lombardo joining us now live to talk about this, stat, and the other. A lot going on, Sheriff. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with the update on the injured Officer Shane Michelonis, who was shot on Monday night. Let's get right to his condition. What is the latest that you can tell us?
Well, thanks for asking. I think it's important for people to understand what's going on. His condition hasn't changed much from the original incident. Unfortunately, his blood pressure has stabilized, but the rest of the symptoms or maladies associated with his condition have not improved so far. But in this situation, you never give up hope, correct? I'm very close to the family. His mom and dad worked for me in previous years. They're both retired from Metro. They're an extended Metro family, and our, prayers go out to him and the rest of the Metro family that he shows some progression and he has a full recovery, hopefully, eventually.
We are all pulling for that, Sheriff. Your whole department's a big family, and it's hard, I know, for all of you. How are the other officers doing right now?
Yeah, that's a common question, Alex, that's presented after a critical incident. And, I'm very proud of them. They're very resilient. We have a lot of services available to the employees after a critical incident because everybody's affected differently, especially in police work. But I'm very proud because they know there's other things still going on in the background. We're dealing with the COVID and dealing with the protesters and the grand opening of the casinos here shortly. So they're staying focused, and our supervisory ranks have a lot of extensive training to recognize people that are troubled or in trouble and to address that and give them services. But overall, I'm proud to say that they're doing great.
Sheriff, we're going to talk about those other topics as well coming up here, but just to backtrack a little bit to the circumstances of Officer Michelonis' injuries, the shooting that took place Monday night. You've addressed this in a press conference already, but can you maybe flesh out a little bit more of what happened near the circus that led to what took place?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure the public, listening public, is very interested in that, and as we are, and it's let me start it off with this. It's a very unfortunate event. So Officer Michelonis is effecting arrest of some rioters, and I describe them as rioters because it had escalated to that type of incident. Right there at the intersection of Las Vegas Boulevard and Circus. He was engaged with an individual, taking him into custody, no problems at this point, and then eventually he fell to the ground. There was a shot heard by some witnesses and some officers in the background, and the officers then shortly realized he had succumbed to a gunshot wound. Immediately rendered aid. He was taken to UMC, and we know the story from that point. But reference the investigation, it was determined that a lone individual, a Hispanic male, located in a parking lot approximately 50 to 60 yards from Officer Michelonis, had shot into the crowd randomly, and Officer Michelonis was struck in the face by one single gun round. That individual fled the scene, and through investigative techniques was located on the property still within one of the rooms, and he was taken into custody along with his girlfriend. He has a small history here in Las Vegas. I can't really opine on his previous and all that because it will end up in the court system. But successful investigation post-incident and taken into custody. So hopefully it works out the way we want it to work out here as it goes into the future.
And we know that suspect will appear in court this morning, so we'll follow that.
That's the plan, yeah. Sheriff,
Thanks for that.
Yeah, Sheriff, the protests we've seen over the last several days nationwide and here in Las Vegas, a response to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the unarmed black man who died while being taken into custody in Minnesota. You've spoken out publicly against what took place and the actions of Minneapolis police. Can you speak to what, in your opinion, that officer did wrong, and what policies does Metro Police have in place to prevent similar actions here?
Yeah, I did. I came out front early on that because it was such an egregious act. The video was self-telling. And the interesting piece on this particular incident is the nation, the police chiefs and sheriffs throughout the nation opined on that early, which is not normal. Usually we ask for patience and we conduct an investigation, because a lot of times in investigation there's some unforeseen factors or unknown factors that will come to light that justify a person's actions. In this case, there was nothing that would justify it, and I think it was the length of the incident. The individual had the officer had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for approximately, I believe, between 8 and 9 minutes. So, and he was obviously docile or not aggravated during that interaction. They could have simply sat him up and taken him into custody. But I think the most disturbing thing was the inaction by his fellow officers. So your question was, do we have policies in place that address this type of situation? Yes, we absolutely do. You know, we had black eyes earlier on this police department in years past, and we learned from them. And I think it's important for an organization to realize you're not infallible, and you've made mistakes, and you have to go forward and adjust those and put policies in place that you're successful in the future. And we had similar type events with our officers, as every other agency in the United States, because they encounter similar type incidents on a daily basis on what they do as police officers. But the important piece on this was he was no longer resistive. He obviously was verbal in his discomfort or inability to breathe. The officer should immediately sat him up and then removed him from the scene. And the other officers, because, you know, when an officer's in a dynamic event, sometimes there's an excuse in the fact that he's out of his mind, dealing with the adrenaline and everything else associated with an event. And they have to rely sometimes on their fellow officers to bring them back to clarity or a point of focus and say, hey, you may not realize that you're on his neck, get up off his neck. And so we can continue with our investigation or our business. And there was 3 other officers that failed to act. So there was a combination of a lot of events, not a lot, a couple simple events that has caused massive destruction across the United States. It's interesting that something that simple at that ground level could have this far-sweeping effect. And that's why it was called out early and loudly. And officers or police chiefs and sheriffs are trying to protect their own community. Hey, we're not going to do that. We don't intend to do that, and please bear with us as we go forward.
Yeah, the inaction was just as horrifying to watch. So, Sheriff Lombardo, thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break here. We have a lot more coming up with Sheriff Lombardo right after this.